Welcome to my channel. Emma sat at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup as she stared out the window. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. It was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of Daniel's spoon against his cereal bowl. He sat across from her, his eyes glued to his phone, scrolling through emails with the same detached focus he gave to everything these days. "Did you hear what I said?" Emma asked, her voice cutting through the silence. Daniel looked up, his brow furrowed as if pulled from a distant thought. Sorry, what was that?" She sighed, her frustration simmering just beneath the surface. "I said I'm meeting a client today. Photographer. He needs some design work for his portfolio." "Oh right. That's good," Daniel replied, his tone absent-minded. He took a sip of his coffee, his gaze already drifting back to his phone. Emma clenched her jaw, her fingers tightening around her cup. It wasn't just his lack of attention that bothered her. It was the way he seemed to exist in a world she couldn't reach. Once they had been inseparable, their love a vibrant force that filled every corner of their lives. But now their marriage felt like a hollow shell, a routine they both went through without truly connecting. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I should get going. Don't want to be late." Daniel nodded, barely looking up. "Okay. Have a good day." The words were automatic, devoid of warmth. Emma grabbed her bag and headed for the door, her chest tight with a mix of anger and sadness. She stepped outside, the cool morning air brushing against her skin, and took a deep breath. The day stretched ahead of her, full of possibilities, and for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to be truly seen again. The cafe was bustling when Emma arrived, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the faint hum of conversation. She spotted Liam immediately, his tall frame leaning casually against the counter as he chatted with the barista. He had an easy confidence about him, his laughter warm and infectious. When he turned and saw her, his face lit up with a smile that made her stomach flutter. "Emma, you made it," he said, stepping forward to greet her. "Of course. I wouldn't miss it," she replied, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. They found a table near the window, the sunlight streaming in and casting a golden glow over everything. Liam's portfolio was spread out before them, a collection of stunning landscapes and candid portraits that spoke of a keen eye and a deep passion for his craft. As they discussed the design work he needed, Emma found herself drawn to his enthusiasm, the way his eyes sparkled when he talked about his travels and the stories behind each photograph. "You're really talented," she said, her admiration genuine. Liam smiled, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "Thanks. That means a lot coming from you. I've seen your work, you know. It's incredible." Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in far too long. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing effortlessly from work to personal interests, their connection growing stronger with each passing moment. By the time they finished their coffee, Emma felt a sense of exhilaration she hadn't felt in years. As they stepped outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Liam turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "I had a great time today. It's not often I meet someone who just gets it, you know." Emma nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I know what you mean." There was a pause, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. Then Liam reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Here, let me give you my number. You know, in case you need to reach me about the project." Emma hesitated for a moment before taking his phone and entering her contact information. As she handed it back, their fingers brushed, sending a jolt of electricity through her. "I'll text you," Liam said, his voice soft but filled with promise. Emma smiled, a mix of excitement and guilt swirling inside her. "I'll look forward to it." She walked to her car, her mind racing with thoughts of Liam and the undeniable connection they shared. But as she drove home, the guilt began to creep in, a nagging voice in the back of her mind reminding her of Daniel and the vows she had made. When she walked through the door, Daniel was on the couch, his laptop balanced on his knees. He looked up briefly, offering a small smile. "Hey, how was your day?" "It was interesting," Emma replied, her voice carefully neutral. Daniel nodded, already turning his attention back to his screen. "That's good." Emma stood there for a moment, watching him, a wave of sadness washing over her. She wanted to tell him everything, to shake him and make him see how much she needed him. But instead, she turned and headed upstairs, her heart heavy with the weight of her choices. As she lay in bed that night, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She picked it up, her breath catching as she read Liam's message. Asterisk, can't stop thinking about today. Let's do it again soon. Asterisk. Emma stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She knew she should ignore it, should delete his number and focus on fixing her marriage. But as the seconds ticked by, she found herself typing a reply. Asterisk, me too. Let's. Asterisk. She hit send before she could change her mind, her heart pounding in her chest. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. Emma's phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with another message from Liam. She glanced at it quickly, her heart skipping a beat as she read his words. Asterisk, thinking of you. Can't wait for Friday. Asterisk. She tucked the phone into her pocket, her cheeks flushing as she tried to focus on the task at hand. It had been a week since their first meeting, and the messages between them had grown more frequent, more intimate. Each notification sent a thrill through her, a mix of excitement and guilt that she couldn't quite shake. She told herself it was harmless, just two people enjoying each other's company. But deep down she knew it was more than that. Emma! Daniel's voice broke through her thoughts, and she looked up to see him standing in the doorway of her home office. Yeah, she replied, her voice a little too bright. I'm heading out. Got a late meeting with a client, he said. His tie already loosened and his suit jacket slung over one arm. Okay. Don't work too late, she said, forcing a smile. Daniel nodded, his expression distracted. You too. Don't stay up all night working on that project. He turned and left without another word, the sound of the front door closing echoing through the house. Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her shoulders sagging with relief. She glanced at her phone again, the screen now dark, and felt a pang of guilt. But the guilt was quickly overshadowed by anticipation. Friday was only 2 days away, and she and Liam had plans to meet again. This time it wasn't for work. The evening air was cool as Emma stepped out of her car, the faint scent of blooming jasmine filling her senses. Liam's apartment was in a trendy part of town, the kind of place she and Daniel had talked about living in when they were younger. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the doorbell, before pressing it firmly. The door opened almost immediately, and there he was, his smile warm and inviting. Hey, you made it. I did, Emma replied, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. Liam stepped aside to let her in, and she followed him into the apartment. It was exactly as she had imagined, modern and minimalist, with large windows that offered a stunning view of the city skyline. The walls were adorned with his photographs, each one telling a story of places she had only dreamed of visiting. Can I get you something to drink? Liam asked, heading toward the kitchen. Wine if you have it, Emma said, her eyes still scanning the room. He returned moments later with 2 glasses of red wine, handing one to her. Their fingers brushed again, and she felt that same jolt of electricity she had the first time they touched. They sat on the couch, the conversation flowing easily as they talked about everything and nothing. Liam's laughter was infectious, his stories captivating, and Emma found herself leaning in closer, drawn to him in a way she hadn't expected. You're amazing, you know that? Liam said suddenly, his voice soft but filled with sincerity. Emma felt her cheeks flush, her heart pounding in her chest. I don't know about that, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I do, Liam said, his gaze intense as he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. The air between them was charged with tension, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, as if drawn by some invisible force, they leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that was both tender and electric. Emma's mind raced, a whirlwind of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. But as Liam's arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer, she let herself get lost in the moment, the guilt and doubt fading into the background. Later, as she lay in Liam's bed, the city lights casting a soft glow through the windows, Emma felt a strange sense of peace. But it was short-lived, the weight of her actions crashing down on her as she thought of Daniel. "What are you thinking about?" Liam asked, his voice breaking the silence. Emma hesitated, her fingers tracing patterns on the sheets. "Just everything," she said finally. Liam propped himself up on one elbow, his expression serious. "I know this is complicated, but I want you to know that I don't take this lightly. You mean a lot to me, Emma." His words sent a shiver down her spine, and she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted, her voice trembling. Liam reached out, his hand gently cupping her face. "We'll figure it out. Together." Emma nodded, though the doubt still lingered in the back of her mind. She knew this couldn't last, that eventually, she would have to face the consequences of her choices. But for now she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could work out. As she drove home later that night, the streets quiet and empty, Emma's thoughts were a tangled mess of emotions. She knew she was playing with fire, risking everything she had built with Daniel. But the pull toward Liam was undeniable, a force she couldn't resist. When she walked through the door, the house was dark and silent. Daniel was already asleep, his breathing steady and even. Emma stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching him for a moment before slipping into bed beside him. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. The guilt was back, stronger than ever, but so was the memory of Liam's touch, his words, his smile. Emma closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She knew she was standing on the edge of a precipice, one wrong step away from falling. But for now she was still holding on, caught between the life she had and the life she wanted. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the bedroom. Emma lay still, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, the weight of her choices pressing down on her chest like a stone. Daniel stirred beside her, his arm brushing against hers as he turned in his sleep. She held her breath, afraid to move, afraid to wake him and face the reality of what she had done. When he finally opened his eyes, she forced a smile, her heart pounding in her chest. "Morning," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel smiled back, his expression warm but distant. "Morning. Sleep okay?" "Yeah," Emma lied, her stomach churning with guilt. They went through their usual routine, sharing a quick breakfast, exchanging polite conversation, but the tension between them was palpable. Emma could feel the weight of her secret like a wall, separating them even as they sat side by side. As Daniel left for work, she stood in the doorway, watching him go. The guilt was overwhelming, a constant ache in her chest that she couldn't ignore. She knew she had to end things with Liam, had to focus on repairing her marriage before it was too late. But when her phone buzzed with a message from him, her resolve wavered. Asterisk, can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again? Asterisk. Emma stared at the screen, her fingers trembling as she typed a reply. Asterisk, we need to talk. Asterisk. They met at the same cafe where it had all begun, the familiar surroundings a stark contrast to the turmoil inside her. Liam was already there when she arrived, his smile fading as he saw the expression on her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Emma took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. It can't continue. I can't keep doing this to Daniel." Liam's face fell, his eyes searching hers. "Emma, I know this is complicated, but what we have, it's real. You can't just walk away from that." "I have to," she said, her voice breaking. "I made a commitment to Daniel. I can't keep betraying him like this. There was a long silence, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Liam reached out, his hand covering hers. I understand. But I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what. Emma felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, her heart aching with the weight of her decision. Thank you, she whispered. They sat there for a while, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, but the tension between them was undeniable. When it was time to leave, Liam walked her to her car, his expression somber. Take care of yourself, Emma, he said, his voice soft but filled with emotion. You too, she replied, her throat tight. As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror, watching as Liam grew smaller and smaller until he disappeared from view. The ache in her chest was almost unbearable, but she knew she had made the right choice. That evening, Emma sat on the couch, her mind racing as she waited for Daniel to come home. She had rehearsed what she would say 100 times, but now that the moment was here, she felt utterly unprepared. When the door finally opened, she stood, her heart pounding in her chest. Daniel walked in, his tie loosened and his suit jacket slung over one arm. He looked tired, but his face lit up when he saw her. Hey, he said, his voice warm. You're still up? Yeah, Emma replied, her voice trembling. We need to talk. Daniel's smile faded, his expression turning serious. Okay. What's going on? Emma took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I've been seeing someone else. The words hung in the air, the silence that followed deafening. Daniel stared at her, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. What? He said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry, Emma said, tears streaming down her face. I never meant for this to happen. But I can't keep lying to you. Daniel sank into a chair, his face pale. Who is it? His name is Liam. He's a photographer I met through work, Emma admitted, her voice breaking. There was another long silence, the weight of her confession pressing down on both of them. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice steady but filled with pain. How long has this been going on? A few weeks, Emma replied, her voice barely audible. Daniel nodded, his expression unreadable. I don't know what to say. I understand if you can't forgive me, Emma said, her voice trembling. But I want to fix this. I want to fix us. Daniel looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. I don't know if that's possible, Emma. The words cut through her like a knife, the finality of them leaving her breathless. She wanted to argue, to beg for another chance, but she knew she had no right. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. Daniel stood, his movements slow and deliberate. I need some time to think. He walked out of the room, leaving Emma alone with her guilt and regret. She sank onto the couch, her body shaking with sobs as the weight of her choices came crashing down on her. The days that followed were a blur, the tension in the house unbearable. Daniel moved into the guest room, their interactions reduced to polite exchanges and awkward silences. Emma tried to give him the space he needed, but the distance between them was agonizing. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, Daniel finally broke the silence. I've been thinking, maybe we should try couples therapy. Emma looked up, her heart pounding in her chest. Really? Daniel nodded, his expression serious. I don't know if we can fix this, Emma. But I'm willing to try. Tears filled her eyes, a glimmer of hope breaking through the darkness. Thank you, she whispered. As they sat there, the air between them heavy with unspoken words, Emma knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other.